Welcome to another episode of Coffee and Crime, where I drink some coffee and talk about true crime. This week, keeping with our theme of the month of true crime or true stories behind famous horror movies, I'm covering the chillingly true story that inspired the recent hit movie, The Lighthouse, a 2019 movie that just came out recently, the one with Robert Pattinson in it. So grab yourself a cup of coffee, curl up on the couch, and get ready for some true crime. The original story of The Lighthouse actually takes place in Pembrokeshire, Wales in 1801. So a very, very long time ago. Small's Lighthouse is what it was called, and it was located on a large group of rocks in a secluded area. So it was approximately 20 miles away from Pembrokeshire, very isolated. Usually lighthouses were put in areas where there were lots of ships going by, so it could help them not hit those extremely large rocks. And unfortunately for the lighthouse keepers at the time, before automated lighthouses, they had to stay at the lighthouse, and they would rotate shifts out by probably like a monthly basis, just so the two men wouldn't be there for such a long period of time. It was most likely always two men because this was back in the 1800s. So, in this story, sometimes referred to as the Smalls Lighthouse tragedy, it's about two men who worked at the lighthouse, Thomas Howell and Thomas Griffith. So, for non-confusion, I will just refer to them by their last names. They were stationed at the lighthouse. These two men did not get along at all. People say they used to argue quite frequently. Imagine being all alone on a small island-like place for weeks or months on end with your rival as the only person to talk to. Awkward situation, if you ask me. I would never, ever agree to that. One fateful day, Griffith became unwell after some sort of accident. I couldn't really find any specification on what the accident was, but due to it, he was very unwell. Howell tried to get help for his colleague, but no help came. It was very hard for them to communicate with anyone. The only communication they had at the time was when a ship came to or from them, probably to take them to the lighthouse or take them back to civilization. So the only other communications they could probably receive were from other ships passing by, and apparently no ship came to their rescue. So due to their remote location and their communication issues, Griffith suffered for weeks from the accident before he finally perished. Howell was panicked after this. He was sure that he would be accused of murder since everyone was aware that the two men did not get along very well. He decided that throwing Griffith's body into the ocean would be too incriminating, as if he were disposing of his dirty work, which he wasn't because he did not actually kill Griffith. Griffith did die from an accident. But imagine if you're stuck on an island with one other person. Everyone knows you're both there, and that other person inexplicably dies without any other witnesses around. Then if you were to throw their body in the water, and then imagine when everyone came back to collect you and you said, oh, they died of an accident, I had to throw their body in the water. If people knew that you didn't get along with each other, then you would definitely be looked at in, like that incriminating way. They would definitely consider that the possibility that you yourself would have in fact killed them. So I can understand where his mind was at this time. And this is a hard thing to even consider having to deal with in the first place. So Howell opted to keep the body of Griffith in the lighthouse. That is until the stench of his rotting corpse became too much for Howell's senses. So imagine this is what happened. I say it was about a week or so, he just had this rotting corpse inside this small enclosed space with him. I don't know if you've ever been inside of like a living quarters of a lighthouse, but it's not as large as you would think it to be. Because lighthouses, though they appear large on the outside, are very small on the inside. So imagine just having a rotting corpse in the bed next to yours for a week. It becomes too much at that point. Hal then decided to craft a makeshift coffin for the body. He placed Griffith inside and strapped the coffin to an exterior shelf of the lighthouse. These are shelves outside of the lighthouse above windows that reflect light into the structure. The winds around the lighthouse were so strong from storms and such that it actually caused the coffin to break because it was just a makeshift one. It wasn't a sturdy one at all. It was just he took wood and nailed it together and put his body inside. It wasn't anything serious. So once it did break, the arm of Griffith's corpse hung free. It fell down over the slope of the shelf and hung down in front of the window. It hung there for however many weeks Hal was stuck there with the body, alone with his own thoughts, as the arm of his former colleague swang in the wind as if beckoning to him from beyond the grave. That's a pretty disturbing imagery right there. When they did finally return to the lighthouse to relieve the men, Howell was so traumatized by the events that his friends said he was a completely different person. He was trapped with a hanging, rotting corpse for weeks in a small hut of a structure. Remember, I said that lighthouses may be tall and large on the outside, but they're not very large on the inside, especially back then for people who had to live in them. The worst part was probably not being able to get help or to leave. He was stuck there. He had no boat. They dropped you off and left you there for however much time you had to stay. So many ships actually passed the lighthouse completely unaware of the tragic events that had happened there. They noticed the figure of the corpse, or maybe like an odd shape on the shelf of the lighthouse, but from the distance that they could not make out what it was, so they simply kept sailing. So no one came in that time period to give him any aid or take away the corpse or take him off the island. He was stuck there. He could not escape. He had no boat. He had no means to get back to civilization until someone came to get him. After the events of this tragedy, the people decided that lighthouses now must be taken care of in groups of 3 instead of 2 people. I'm sure it was to ensure that if someone were to perish, no one would be left alone to fester in the aftermath. Nowadays, we have automated lighthouses, so no one actually has to be a keeper of a lighthouse, but just imagine having a job like that back then. I can't even. The solitude and isolation. I'm a very introverted person, but it's only to a certain point. Now let's take a look at the movie. This is the recent rendition of The Lighthouse. There were actually a couple of other versions of this story being told by other people, but the latest one is this 2019 telling of the story. It's a black and white movie. I know that may seem strange for a movie to be black and white in 2019, but there's a valid reason for this choice. When watching the movie, it feels more immersive and more within the time period. The movie is a psychological horror movie. That means that it doesn't use your average horror movie scare tactics that so many people are used to seeing and associating with horror movies. Therefore, some don't view movies such as this one to be a horror movie, but if you pay attention to the film, it very much is. It's dealing with a lot of mental problems and just people going crazy from the isolationism. The movie starts out in the setting of the late 19th century with 2 men, Ephraim Winslow and Thomas Wake. Interesting that they keep the first name of one of the men the same. That was a little tidbit that I noticed. Wake is depicted as an older man who's very irritable, and Winslow a young man who hasn't been doing this type of job very long, if not even at all. So, while exploring his quarters at the beginning of the movie, Winslow discovers a small scrimshaw, which is Think like a wooden carving or some sort of carving that someone makes of a mermaid, is what he found. So a scrimshaw or a carving of a mermaid. He decides to keep it in his jacket as a little token, I suppose. So while they begin working together, Wake proves to be just as demanding as he is irritable, and he orders Winslow to do all the menial and taxing jobs that he doesn't want to do. Obviously, when you have seniority over someone else, you'll order them around to do things that you don't like to do at your work. So jobs like emptying chamber pots. Remember, this movie is set in the before times, so no bathrooms or outhouses. And painting the lighthouse. He refuses Winslow access to the actual room that has the light, or the actual room where you would control the light. During Winslow's stay on the island, he starts to hallucinate. He sees images of sea monsters and logs floating in the sea, and he becomes obsessed with the mermaid carving that he has, even to the point of having some alone time with it, if you catch my drift. He also continues to observe the fact that Wake has been having some strange behavior. He has a strange ritual where he will go into the lantern room, that room where you light the light for the lighthouse, I suppose. Wake would go in there every evening and secretly disrobe before the light, which was odd, and Winslow didn't know why. There was a seagull there that he was bothered by. Wake tells him not to kill that seagull, as he's superstitious that the gulls are reincarnated sailors, which is an interesting thing to think about. One evening, while they're having dinner, Wake reveals to Winslow that his previous protege died after losing his sanity, which Winslow reveals, which Winslow should think about to himself. Well, I'm hallucinating. I'm having these weird experiences. That's a little concerning for him. Winslow reveals to Wake that he is a former timberman from Canada and he is seeking a new trade, so that's why he decided to come and be a lighthouse keeper. That's a very interesting job switch. I don't know, I'd kind of stick with the timberman thing because at least you can socialize. So the day before his scheduled departure, the day before Winslow is set to leave the island, he discovers a dead seagull inside of a canister, and it's bloodying its water. Winslow is again attacked by that weird one-eyed seagull, and he actually, in anger, it's quite disturbing and not spoiler warning, but trigger warning to any person who has issues with animal abuse. He does kill it. The wind drastically changes direction as a violent storm strikes the whole island, and Winslow and Wake have to spend the night inside. So they're spending the night getting drunk as the storm rages on outside, and the next morning it prevents the ferry who's supposed to relieve them from arriving, so they're stuck on the island. So Winslow's going through his normal routines. He's emptying the chamber pots, and he notices as he empties them that a body washes up onto the shore, and he discovers that it's a mermaid. And it awakens and it makes this horrifying howl at him. I mean, when I was watching the movie at this point, I was like, this has to be a hallucination. He flees back to their hut, their cottage where they were staying, and Wake informs him that their rations have been spoiled because of the storm, and the new ones won't arrive for weeks. So the pair of them, they go and unearth a crate in the lighthouse that supposedly contains reserve rations, but they only find more alcohol. Which, I mean, alcohol's fun, but not when you need food. So, in the few days while the storm is continuing to rage on, it's preventing anyone from coming to the island, they spend the days and nights drinking lots of alcohol and hallucinating. They hallucinate a lobster trap that contains the one-eyed head of Wake's previous protege. Winslow confesses to Wake that his real name is Thomas Howard, and that he assumed the identity of Ephraim Winslow, his foreman who had died in an accident that Howard had purposefully neglected to stop. At this point in the movie, Wake chases the now we know as Howard instead of Winslow. Wake chases Howard down, accusing him of spilling his beans, and he destroys their only little, paddle boat, is what a dory is called. He destroys it with an axe. And once he's incapacitated, Wake claims that it was Howard who chased him and destroyed the dory. So he's trying to convince him that he didn't do it. I mean, shouldn't the unsettling thing be that we now know his name as Thomas Howard? Hint, hint, wink, wink to the Thomas Howell connection. You see the name connection? Now they're both Thomas. Interesting connection between the two, just saying. Wouldn't it be more disconcerting to Wake that Winslow had just not murdered, but could have prevented his former protege's or former coworker's death, but he didn't? Interesting that Wake would chase Howard down, accusing him of spilling his beans instead of being more concerned with the fact that he had let someone under his care die. I'd be more concerned with the fact that someone's lying about their name. But okay. The two no longer have any alcohol left. They don't have the only boat that they could possibly use to escape the island after the storm. They're kind of stuck here. They begin drinking a concoction of turpentine and honey. A turpentine is a fluid obtained by trees. You would think normally turpentine is used as a paint thinner, but it can be used as other things. And when combined with honey, I guess it makes some sort of drinkable concoction of some sort. The storm outside is worsening at this point, and it starts flooding their little abode. The next morning, Howard finds Wake's logbook. Remember, Howard is Winslow, by the way. If it's too confusing for you, I'm sorry. Howard finds Wake's logbook, in which Wake wrote a report of Howard's performance and recommended he would be sacked. He would be cut off, modern day pink slipped without pay. Obviously, Howard confronts Wake about this, and Wake berates Howard. So Howard attacks Wake while hallucinating that mermaid that he saw earlier in the movie. The real Winslow and Wake, as Prometheus, a Greek mythology-like figure, Howard beats Wake into submission and takes him to the hole at the base of the lighthouse to bury him alive. Wake curses Howard as he is buried, wishing him a Promethean fate. So this is again a Greek mythological connection. Prometheus is a Titan god of fire, so maybe a burning fate, so going to hell, I would interpret it as. Howard takes the keys to the lantern room, but Wake frees himself and strikes Howard with the axe. Howard ends up disarming Wake, and he kills him. Instead of just burying him alive, he finally kills him before ascending the lighthouse. In the lantern room, the Frenzial lens. So this is it's a lens that they have on the light of the lighthouse. So it reflects a certain way, I'm assuming, opens to Howard. So this lens opens to him, who reaches in and violently screams in distortion before slipping and falling down the lighthouse steps. And the very end of the movie is really graphic and quite disturbing. So any of my squeamish listeners, you might want to skip this part. The end of the movie, Howard is lying naked on the rocks. He fell down the stairs of the lighthouse, and now he's lying naked on the rocks with a damaged eye, and a flock of seagulls is pecking at his exposed bowels. So his body is ripped open, and he's still living at this point, which is the most disturbing thing. So this movie is the newest take on the story, the Smalls Lighthouse tragedy, and I can honestly see some of the connections of losing your mind or going insane that um I'm sure the actual Thomas Howell felt when he was staying there all by himself with just a rotting corpse. You would start to lose your mind. You'd start to go insane. I know this is a little different from the regular true crime stuff. It's not really a crime per se, but this movie is just very interesting and very deep and very disturbing, and it really covers a lot of mental health issues, and it talks about insanity and just like the actual story. Thinking about the trauma that Thomas Howell must have gone through, that they probably didn't even realize how traumatic it was at the time to have to stay with a dead body for however long he was stuck there. So they kept that idea of trauma and insanity and brought it into the movie in a different way. And it deals a lot with the effects of isolationism and disliking the only other person you can speak to. So it's very interesting. If you haven't seen the movie, which obviously too late to say now, but spoilers for the movie, I absolutely recommend that you watch it because it's a very, very good psychological thriller horror movie. It's slow paced and it's in black and white, so it might bore some people. I know some people they have to have color movies. I mean, look what happened to Psycho. We had to remake it into a color movie, even though the original Alfred Hitchcock movie was perfectly fine. But and look what happened to that. But people prefer color movies. I know, but I like and quite enjoy the fact that they made a movie that was in black and white. They usually don't make black and white movies, especially in America, or American culture doesn't like black and white movies nowadays, but I think it's an interesting and more different take. So, this has been another episode of Coffee and Crime, and I will see you next time. Until then. Thank you for listening to another episode of Coffee and Crime. Exciting news for us. We are now available on almost all places that you want to listen to your podcast, so including Spotify and soon Apple Podcasts. I will update you when that arrives. So if you're listening to this on YouTube and you would like to listen to it on a different platform, there will be a link in the description for you to do so. And I want to say thank you to any new listeners, and of course, thank you to all of my current supporters and my current listeners for sticking around with me. And exciting news for everyone. On the 31st, I will be uploading a Halloween special video where I will talk about Wes Craven's inspiration behind Nightmare on Elm Street, and also the chilling reality or the chilling true stories behind the hotel from The Shining. So look forward to that on the 31st, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Don't forget to give this video a like if you're on YouTube. Don't forget to follow or subscribe. Thank you, everyone.